station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event? Wall Street Journal Digital Network, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is the Wall Street Journal Digital Network. How do you hear us? So, good morning. So, I'm in New York today. You're 250 miles overhead, and as best I can tell, speeding towards South America at about 22,000 kilometers an hour. We want to talk about space medicine. You've trained in internal medicine. You've a specialty in aerospace medicine. So what I'm wondering is, are you up there in your capacity as a doctor or as a mission specialist who can run the robotic arm?
So that's a great question that I actually get quite a bit. Some people think that I was only launched to the space station because I was a physician. And the truth is, we do not have a doctor on every mission. So when you come into the astronaut corps, whether you're a physician, a military test pilot, a chemist, an engineer, you come in and we are trained equally across the board in everything, including space station systems, how to run the robot arm, like you mentioned, how to do spacewalks. We're all trained equally. Now, that being said, because I am a physician, if we were to have an event up here on the space station, of course, I would step in with my expertise. But we certainly don't, kind of like Star Trek, Bones, we don't have a Bones on board the International Space Station. In fact, there are other crew members that received some medical training education prior to the launch as well.
So let me ask then. Now, I should say there's never been a serious medical emergency in space, but how are you, as a doctor, prepared up there for the worst?
So a lot of the ways we prepare, certainly we have a fair number of medical supplies here with us on orbit. And people say, well, what can you do up here? Well, we can do basic suturing. If someone were to get, a decent cut or so, we can stitch that up. We certainly have all kinds of bandages and splints. We have a host of medication, including IV medication if needed, if we were to get some sort of infection. So there's a lot that we can do up here. It's never in isolation, though. We have a host of physicians on the ground that follow us all the time. In fact, that's what I used to do prior to going in the Corps, that are following our health issues should something arise, and they can offer their expertise. We also have an ultrasound machine up here on board the space station, and you can do a lot of imaging with ultrasound nowadays, and we can have specialists on the ground that guide us through that if we should need that. So we get a lot of training ahead of time, plus the astronaut corps undergoes an incredible amount of medical screening to try and limit what may happen up here on orbit.
So how does microgravity affect basic medical procedures that you might actually have to perform? I mean, even something as simple as CPR.
That's a fantastic question. So what we've learned, and let's start with CPR. Let's start with what you asked. Traditionally, on the ground, on Earth, gravity is holding both the patient and the person treating the patient on the ground. You don't have to worry about being stable. Up here, restraining yourself is of the utmost importance. So we have a special way to strap somebody down should they need to be restrained. And then we also have ways of strapping the operator down. What we've found in training scenarios, however, is that the easiest way for someone on orbit to perform CPR, and you can find pictures of this everywhere, is to actually flip upside down and put their feet on the ceiling and use their legs to push. It is much harder for us to, quote unquote, kneel next to the patient and hover over them and perform CPR. It's too difficult to hold ourselves down. Other areas that are very, very different from Earth is obviously the way fluids act up here. And for example, bleeding. So if you were to get a simple cut on the skin, what we call a venous bleed, that blood will actually pool and spread at the site. It doesn't just fall down to the ground like it does on Earth. If it were a more serious bleed, like from an artery, that is going to shoot, and it's going to keep on going until it hits the next surface. And so you really have to be careful, because everyone is at risk during any sort of medical procedure that we do up here, even a simple blood draw, because those fluids can go in any direction. And those are some of the biggest things that we encounter up here.
So you have worked both sides now of this situation. As you mentioned a minute ago, you've worked as a flight surgeon on previous mission, being the person on Earth who would, in theory, guide the medical team in orbit. And, of course, now you are a physician in orbit. I'm wondering, how do you rehearse these things? Have you rehearsed, say, a smoke inhalation emergency, or a broken bone, or a severe contusion of some sort? I mean, is that part of the dress rehearsal for space?
Absolutely. We do have simulations that we run as a crew, not only performing CPR, using a defibrillator or an AED, which we do have up here on station, utilizing how to inject certain medications. We actually spend quite a number of hours practicing what we would do for those, knock on wood, worst case day scenarios, so that we understand the roles and responsibilities, where the equipment is, how to restrain the patient, and what steps we take. And we have specific procedures that we do follow. We also do take a lot of crew members to a hospital, a local hospital setting, to let them practice, do things like suturing, like putting in an IV, so that the first time they do it isn't up here on board the space station.
Well, I saw you looking around to knock on wood. I don't know that there's a lot of wood on the space station, but I'll just say we're knocking on it down here. In the event that a medical emergency did arise in orbit, teamwork and time, of course, is incredibly important. Should such an emergency occur, who's in charge? Does the doctor get to exercise medical authority, or do you have to defer to the mission commander and the flight controllers, mission directors on Earth? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, these are things that you kind of discuss as a team ahead of time, depending on who the patient is. Certainly, if I'm the patient, then you're going to defer to the mission commander at that point. But I know the mission commander pretty well, and if a medical event were to occur, we would work together, and he would, of course, defer to my expertise in some of these matters, because I have dealt with a lot of things before. But we always make decisions up here together. This is the way you operate up here on board the space station, is to make sure everybody understands the plan forward. Now, of course, we have the ground, and we're going to have, in the case of an emergency, we're going to give the ground as much information as we can. But, there's a saying in aviation, that's aviate, navigate, communicate. And we do the same thing in medicine. So if something big and bad happens very quickly, the crew is going to do what they feel is the right thing to do in those initial steps, and then communicate to the ground as necessary, who are always ready to step in and help. And we have a variety of ways to do that. But you're right. As each scenario comes up, we would sit and discuss, hey, what's our best path forward? How much time do we have here? Do we need more help on the ground? Do we need a specialist to come in and help us out? And then we'd make that call.
If I could just digress a moment for a formality I should have observed at the outset of our conversation, I wonder if you would do me the favor of formally introducing yourself to my listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Serena Anand-Chancellor. I'm a flight engineer up here on board the International Space Station for Expedition 56 and 57. We launched on Soyuz MS-09 on June 6th of this year.
And in the same vein, I wonder if you would share with us your considerable background in training as a physician, an internist, and a specialist in aerospace medicine.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Certainly. In the same vein, would you share with us your training as an internist and a specialist in aerospace medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually did my undergraduate degree at the George Washington University in electrical engineering, then came to the great state of Texas and did 4 years of medical school at the now McGovern Medical School. Then went down to Galveston Island at the University of Texas Medical Branch and spent 3 years in internal medicine, 1 year as chief resident of internal medicine, and then 2 years of aerospace medical training there at UTMB. I am still a practicing physician. I practiced up until about a month and a half prior to launch and enjoy absolutely every minute of it.
So what attracted you to aerospace medicine in particular? Is this a part of your desire to become an astronaut, or what motivated you?
So I knew from a little age, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I would work for NASA. And people say, how did you know that? You just know at the time. And so I initially, when I went to undergrad, I went into engineering because I really enjoyed math and science, and it was a great field. I loved doing it. And then a lot of my friends at that time convinced me that they thought I should go into medical school. They were all pre-med engineers. And so I have to give them credit for pushing me in that direction. And when I went into medical school, I knew I still wanted to work for NASA. I just didn't know the right path there. And then I went and listened to a talk that was given by now retired astronaut Dave Wolf. And he talked about flight surgeons. And I said, well, that is the neatest career I've ever heard. That kind of marries these two loves that I have. And again, lucky enough, in the state of Texas, they have one of the only aerospace medicine programs in the country. I did a month rotation at Johnson Space Center in aerospace medicine and threw my hat in the ring, put my application in for the program, and got in.
Thank you for doing that. So let me ask this question. There are many physiological changes that occur to the human body when it's in microgravity, and one assumes those physiological changes will become, larger as space voyagers move out of the magnetosphere of Earth and into deep space. I wonder, how do those kinds of biological changes in microgravity affect how medicines work? I mean, pain relievers, antibiotics, do they behave differently in the body in microgravity? Do they require different doses? I mean, how as a doctor do you figure that out?
That's a fantastic question. It's actually something we're studying right now, and that's the field of pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. We are actually, medicines that we have up here on board the space station, we resupply at a regular rate. And when we bring those medicines back down to the ground, they are doing studies on those medicines right now, because you're right, we really don't have a good sense of how much, do we have the same amount absorbed in the body as we would on the ground? How long are those medicines lasting up here? We have a different radiation environment up here on the space station than we do on Earth. How is medicine impacted by that? And on the same token, if we go to Mars, how are our medicines going to last? Could we find a way to 3D print those medicines with the right material? Because if our medicines expire every 6 to 12 months on the ground, we're not going to make it out to Mars right now with non-expired medicines. So it's a great question to ask, because this is something that is very real, and certainly in the next 5 to 10 years we need to think about. But I wish I could give you a better answer right now to that question. What I can say we traditionally do up here is utilize the same dose or similar dosages that we would on Earth. We haven't altered any of those dosages for spaceflight.
So, to continue on the Mars theme for a moment, what, again, as a doctor, what do you anticipate as the biggest medical challenge of the long-duration spaceflight? I mean, on long voyages, say, to Mars or to one of the asteroids.
Boy, it's hard to narrow it down to one thing, so I'm going to mention a few because I think they're all important. Number one is radiation. Certainly, as we leave the protection of Earth, the Earth's atmosphere, the Earth's magnetic field, the shielding of ISS, which is pretty thick and protects us from a lot of that radiation, as we expand out beyond that towards Mars, we are not as well protected and have to take a look at how we provide that shielding, how the human body responds to that radiation during a very long trip. What do we do with a big solar particle event? You know, what if there's several, even moderate-sized ones? How will the body respond to that? Number two, and I call this behavioral only because even living up here for 6 months, you are away from family. You're very close to the Earth. I have constant contact with family on cell phones, pictures, videos. It's really fantastic what we're able to do up here. How will that change as we move out beyond that and the time delay in communication gets greater and greater and greater? One of the best devices we have up here on board the space station is something called ARED. It's the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device to keep our muscles and our bones strong. It is a big piece of equipment, though, and whether we can fit that or something similar in a smaller ship heading towards Mars, I'm not sure. So how do we maintain bone and muscle health? And then finally, what you mentioned, medication. How do we keep medication potent and effective for not only the journey out, but a surface stay and the journey back? And I could go on forever about this, but those are the top 4 things I'd talk about.
That's great. So let me ask, in your years now as an astronaut in training, is there anything that you've learned either working as a flight surgeon or now in your time in space aboard the space station that's informed or changed your ideas about how you might best practice medicine on Earth?
You know, it's a good question. I think, you know, after specializing in aerospace medicine, it just gives you a different perspective on things. And, you know, aerospace medicine is the study of, for the most part, normal people in extreme environments. Environments you don't normally think about, the diving environment, the space environment, pilots. And so it just gives you a little bit different twist that someone's occupation can definitely affect their health. And I think that's how it's changed me as a physician, is when I talk to a patient that's experiencing new symptoms, I always ask about what they do for a living. What did they do yesterday? What sorts of things are they exposed to? And you'd be surprised what comes out in the occupational environment that can impact somebody and lead to an answer and lead to at least a helpful clue or even a solution as to why they're feeling the way they are. And so I think that's where aerospace medicine has really helped me, in that the environment you work in matters tremendously and can impact your health in the same, you know, manner, whether it be positive or negative.
Not to violate anyone's medical privacy, but I'm curious, as a flight surgeon working from the ground on a prior mission, and as a trained physician in board the space station now, I just wonder, what's the most serious medical matter that's come up for you so far?
Great question. I can't provide too many details on that, only because, again, kind of like what I said, we try and treat a lot of this stuff on the ground before it ever becomes an issue on the space station. You know, the risk for an event occurring does increase with the number of days and number of people you have in space. So certainly we've had minor things come up, like urinary tract infections, small cuts, small wounds, things that we're pretty easily, you know, we're able to treat up here very easily. And luckily, again, knock on wood, we haven't had anything serious lately. And so, but, you know, that's something that our docs on the ground and our big medical, and these are international boards. It's not just NASA that takes a look at all these crew members before we go. We have to get the buy-in of every international partner to make sure that our folks are healthy before we go up here. So it's a big process. We do the best we can with reducing our risk as low as we can. Does that mean in the future we won't have an issue? It does not. But I think with all the training, we'll be ready for it.
So I want to thank you, Doctor, for this house call, and I hope the rest of your voyage is as event-free in a medical sense as it has been so far. And thank you very much for the time you've spent with us today.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure for me to talk about space medicine. It's a great passion of mine. Makes it even more fun to be up here and see how my own body's reacted to microgravity. So it's been great being with you today. Thank you.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event.
Thank you, Wall Street Journal Digital Network, and all participants. Station, we are now resuming operational audio communications.